All right, this video is how to play along with the Barry Harris workshop DVD. The opening of this thing is just crazy. So if you got the DVD and you got the workbook, the first thing is like, all right, dominant scales. And they start just like shredding through these scales. Of course, they're cycling through, but it's pretty difficult. What I've eventually ended up doing is I learned better about the process through another book that we played through on the Jazz Forum, Patterns for Jazz. And that book kind of taught me how to cycle, how to think about the cycle, in combination with things I learned from Reg on the Jazz Forum with his second finger reference and things like that. I finally learned kind of how to play through that thing. But it's fast and it's kind of technical, and it just makes you realize where we are in relationship to like horn players. And I think it's largely because we don't practice it the same way that horn players do. And I think it's funny that somebody on the Jazz Forum like Reg, who's very different from Barry Harris, sounds like Barry Harris when you read Barry Harris's introduction in the workshop DVD booklet. Barry Harris on technique, it sounds like Reg. There are no shortcuts to the learning process. It isn't possible for someone to go out, buy a horn, and get a gig the next day. Technical mastery of one's instrument is a starting point, and from there, with a lot of hard work, one might reach the height of moving the music forward. How do you even start doing something, and it's fast, you know? So what I finally arrived at with Patterns for Jazz was a process, and I think the guitar, it's unique. It's a different kind of instrument. The fact that it's the same, we don't have black notes, white notes. Reg says you have to establish your own sense of where the black and white notes are by learning patterns in reference to something. And the something for him is the position of the second finger on the sixth string. So he would say, you know where the notes are in G major from G, okay? And then you know where the notes are in G major from A. It's a different pattern from B, from C, from D, E, F sharp. And that's how you learn the fretboard. And then you can do the same thing in C, but only one note changes. And if you do it the way he talks about, he's always starting on that second finger, and he uses first finger stretches. If you do that, you end up with this pattern where only one note changes when you change scales. So it's beautiful that way. So here's my process. This is not the way. This is just a way. And it helped me, and it got me where I could finally Anyway, I feel like I could go to the workshop. If I knew it was coming up, I would practice that. But anyway, I can practice stuff from the workshop DVD booklet now, and I can kind of think, especially around seventh position and third position, because I practiced those with that other book mostly. And it's very freeing that you kind of know what scale you're playing, you kind of know what chord you're playing, arpeggio, you kind of know where the notes are. And you know it in a different way than like having to look at the neck the whole time and stuff like that. So for me, the process is this. Day one, let's pretend that you already know this. You have good technique on this. Like fingers are not flying. You've already done the technical work where you can play all that smoothly. So then you learn the one octave pattern. Let's make it dominant. So I'm gonna start from, I've got one stretch. So on the first day, I'm learning G in reference to second finger reference G. And I learned them as a one octave pattern, so I'm gonna start here. from G on the 4th string. So if I'm alternate picking, that's down, up. And I'm going to cycle through using just that one pattern. And I'm going to work on technique because I can't play with those horn players. You know, if you can't do that, you got to work it out technically. So for me, that looked like this. It was basically making a spider technique exercise out of it. So move a finger, you know, add fingers and just let them ring ugly. It gives your fingers a sense of place. It fixes the flying fingers thing and the bad technique thing that I think we all have if we don't do some of this work. So now Reg talks about the angle. I'm not doing this to get that stretch. It's called a stretch, but Reg is not really stretching. He's got his hands at an angle, so the fingers are not spread apart. It's more like a violin, diagonal, you know, kind of thing. I'm also I'm leaning and playing with the side of my finger. I've got very small hands, and so I'm just gonna really isolate that and get that technique good. And eventually I'm not gonna worry about all that, I'll just play it. But the way to clean that technique up is to kind of do that and really become fascinated with the movement, like one finger to another. And I can already play it. But when I was first doing this, you play it at a certain speed and try to find the flaws. And if there's some place that there's a hitch, usually it's where you're going from 3 notes per string to 2 notes per string or something like that. It's gonna be that stretch. So you do that. You work out the technique. All right, so what I would do is cycle that through, that's C, then I'll do it in F. As slowly as I need to for my level of technique. A flat, D flat. Now, until I learn this, in the beginning, I'm gonna look at the neck. But eventually it's ear training, where you're not looking at the neck. And you just use your ears to tell you if you're in the right place. What it does, it doesn't enforce like we just did, and then then you do it in half steps. And D, E flat. Of course, you do this at the speed you can do it. So I'm back to C. Now I'm thinking letter names as I do that. C, D flat, D, E flat, F sharp, G, or G flat, G. Now that's half steps. The next one would be whole steps. So you do the same thing. Now this is ear training. When I was doing this, I'd do like 2 or 3 of these positions moving around per day. And then after 2 or 3 days, then I start cycling in one position. So it's really helpful while you're working on technique and it's easy and it's one fingering pattern, like really work on technique. And you're getting ear training for the patterns that are eventually going to be in position, and then your ears just take over. And you know what they sound like because you've done them, even if it's just moving one position around. So that really helped me a lot. Now, while you're doing this, I'll skip ahead, pretend like I've done it and I've practiced, What you want to do eventually, that I wanted to do, because they're fast. And these horn players, it's real legato and pretty to emulate some of that on the guitar. One thing you could do is do the Randy Vincent thing of slurring the upstroke into the next would-be downstroke, but you don't pick the downstroke, so you slur. You find places where you've got notes on the same string where you could do that. So the second two notes, you've got an upstroke going into a downstroke on the same string. So you could leave out the downstroke. So it just makes it swing a little bit. So on the way down, you've got two. That one's one. I don't know, you can't see it. I just do upstrokes. It's just, I alternate pick, so it just adds a little legato to it. Now, the only way you can really do that is you can do it over and over in one position. But since I happen to be cycling with one pattern, I can actually focus on that. I can focus on technique. And plus, I'm kind of mentally engaged in the process because I'm also playing these different cycles. So the next cycle is whole step. So C. So I need to practice that. D, E. Let's see. All right, F sharp, G sharp, A flat, B flat, that's cool, C sharp, D flat. So my legato gets a little better as I go. Because I'm playing the same thing physically. It's cool to work on that legato technique. That's whole steps. Then we do minor thirds. C, E flat, F sharp, A, what's next? F, A flat, B, D, B flat. You do that for a couple of days and it really cleans things up. Again, I would be going very slowly. I wouldn't be going fast if it's new. So just understand, practice it really slowly, clean up the technique, and then you speed it up. Anyway, that's what I would do. If you do that, you've played the same thing 48 times. Take care of your hands, listen to your body, make sure you're not doing anything weird where you're hurting yourself repetitive, whatever. But you've got an excuse to play the same thing 48 times in a very mentally engaging way. I really like that. But the whole way through, of course, I'm thinking about where I am in relationship to the sixth string. That's the beginning of a first day. When I did it, I knew these scales already, so I would do 2 or 3 of these patterns in one sitting. So the next one's based on my G scale. I was talking about from G. if I do G major from A, that's G major from A, is A Dorian. The major scale in that position starts on G here. So that one is, oh, we were doing dominance, weren't we? All right, well, what's that? So that's gonna be based on this Aeolian. So C, and let me just do C again because I was doing C. So C with reference to D. So now I'm thinking about the D as I move these around, D and G and whatever. Whatever the ninth of my chord of the moment. So this is C. So from D, I've got this reference chord that's 10, 9, 11, 10. It's a ninth chord, but it's got my reference note, D now. I'm playing my C chord, C dominant, from the 10th fret, which is D, and so I've got a little chord voicing with a reference note to that. C, then G, and I'm thinking about the G there, because that's where I am. B flat, and I'm thinking about the C. Okay, this is gonna be really important later when I'm playing in one position, because I can play all 7 of the scales that have a C in them. I play them with reference to it. That position was C. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. So that's B flat, then E flat. A flat. D flat. G flat. F sharp if it's dominant, probably. B, and I'm thinking about the C sharp. E from F sharp. A. I'm thinking about my B. D from my E. G. All right, so what it does is I'm changing the octave and coming back down here in the same places in terms of reference note. So to do the same thing, half steps. D, E flat, E, F. Now I changed and went back down here because on G I'm coming back down here, and G is my reference note for F and with this fingering pattern. F sharp, G, A flat, A, B flat, B, C. And if I did right, that's D, and it is. So it's a different thought process. The way I would do this in real life. Go real slow. Only move things when they have to be moved. And just, allow yourself to really be fascinated with small movement. It just take the time to just like nerd out on it. I'm going fast just because, watch somebody practice. But I wanted you to understand the second finger reference thing. That I'm thinking about C from C and C from D. And then I'll think about C from E. And C from F. So all of those are important just to have a sense of place. That's probably enough for one day, just to do it in a couple of positions and like really work on the technique. Just kind of camp out and nerd out on it. It's essential to play this stuff this fast. They're too fast. It's just good. So that one's got some nice slur opportunities now. If I go back to this hand, so there are 2 in a row. Down, up, up. Two at the end. That's just real nice. Anyway, I get my amp away. I gotta get a new amp. But they're just beautiful. You just plug in. They're nice and legato. They just sound good. Like, look at this one. That one, because it's got that weird 4th finger stretch, okay? That one will tend to want to sound kind of robotic if you pick all of them. But if you slur where you can on the upstrokes, it sounds great. And it's the most awkward fingering of the 3 we've done so far, maybe of the whole thing, not of the whole thing, but it just, it's just great. So that legato technique, it's real important for me personally. It's not a rule. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it. I just kind of saw it in that Randy Vincent book. But when you get to Barry Harris's half-step scales, I think they're essential. I don't know how you play them and sound musical if you're not doing that. They just sound great. There's so many that are not picked there. It just sounds... I mean, they cover for so much bad technique. I mean, you can just... Well, that really was bad. But it just... They're just so... I don't know. They just make it so musical and enjoyable to practice something that's pretty difficult to get up to speed anyway. And it helps with the speed. So I would highly recommend just, give it a try, see what you think. It's a good excuse to actually do the thing, where you practice the same exact fingering, just, especially when you get to a weird one, like playing C dominant from where you're at D, or whichever ones you have more trouble visualizing. The ones from the 7th are weird, Man, they sound so good though, legato. That is the best fingering. It's just... This is yours. They're so good. They're so much fun to play. That legato technique is a lot of fun. That's the first 2 positions.